I never told my son what I kept hidden inside the grandfather clock at the back of my repair shop. When he married a woman who saw my life's work as nothing more than a number on a balance sheet, I made sure every move she made was documented. One afternoon, my shop assistant called me from the back room, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Calloway, you need to come see this. Your daughter-in-law is in here, and she's going through your desk." I had been waiting 18 months for this moment, and everything I had quietly prepared was about to change the direction of my family forever. I'm grateful you're here with me. Before I tell you what happened that afternoon, leave a comment that says the word protect if you believe real love sometimes means shielding the people you care about from the very worst version of themselves. There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a watch repair shop after the last customer leaves. It isn't the quiet of emptiness. It's more like the quiet of a held breath. Every piece on those shelves is waiting for someone's hands, waiting for its purpose. I've spent 38 years learning to hear the difference between a clock that's simply stopped and one that's dying. The sounds are not the same. My name is Arthur Calloway. I'm 64 years old, and most people in Asheville, North Carolina know me as the man on Lexington Avenue who can bring a timepiece back from the dead. Calloway Clock and Watch Repair has sat in this same storefront since 1989. The building itself is narrow, brick-faced, with a hand-lettered window sign my wife painted herself the year we opened. Miriam used gold leaf and a fine brush she'd ordered from an art supply catalog. She took 3 days on those letters. I've never changed them. Inside, the walls hold more than inventory. They hold memory. Pocket watches with cracked crystals, mantel clocks with bent chimes, wristwatches brought in by grandchildren whose grandparents are gone but who want the things still running. Every piece tells me something. Every worn gear, every stripped crown, every spring, too tired to hold tension anymore. People think I fix clocks. What I actually do is refuse to let time stop for the things that matter. My workshop is in the back of the shop, separated from the front by a low wooden counter and a doorway hung with a bead curtain Miriam bought at a craft fair in 1994. She said it gave the place character. I said it made me feel like I was walking into a fortune teller's tent every time I went to work. She laughed for about a week about that one. Miriam passed 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, discovered in October, and gone by February. The fastest and most devastating 5 months of my life. She was 57 years old. She had plans for 60. She left me a lot of things when she went. She left me the shop, the lease, the customer ledger going back 2 decades. She left me her gold leaf paintbrush, still wrapped in a cloth in the top drawer of her desk. She left me our son, Daniel, who was 26 at the time and already beginning to grow into a man she'd be proud of. And she left me a clock. Not just any clock. A bracket clock. English. Circa 1880. With a fruitwood case and a brass dial that still shows every hour in Roman numerals the way the maker intended. She'd bought it at an estate sale the year before she got sick. She spent 3 weekends restoring it herself, which was unusual for her. She was a bookkeeper by trade, not a clockmaker. But she wanted to learn, she said. She wanted to understand what I loved about the work. 2 days before she went into the hospital for the last time, she brought the clock from the house to the shop and set it on the shelf above my workbench. She didn't explain why. She just looked at me with those steady gray eyes she had and said, "Arthur, this one stays here. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do with it." I thought she was confused. The morphine had been increasing. I smiled and told her I'd keep it safe. I did not understand what she meant for a very long time. Daniel was a good boy. I want to say that plainly, without qualification, because everything that follows gets complicated, and I don't want you to lose that truth in the middle of the complication. He was a good boy who became a good man, honest, hard-working, the kind of person who holds doors and remembers names and shows up when you need him. He works as a structural engineer for a firm in Asheville. He is careful with numbers and careful with people, which are 2 different skills, and he was blessed with both. After Miriam died, he drove over every Sunday. We ate breakfast together. He helped me with deliveries when my back got bad. He never asked about the will. Never mentioned money. He just showed up. I thought I had done something right. In the spring 3 years ago, Daniel met a woman named Courtney Baines at a work fundraiser. She was 31, sharp-looking, worked in real estate development. Daniel brought her to the shop on a Saturday in April, proud in the way new love makes young men proud, like they've discovered something the rest of the world missed. She was attractive in a deliberate way, the kind of put-together that takes real effort to look effortless. She shook my hand with both of hers and said the shop was absolutely charming. I thanked her. I watched her eyes move around the room. She wasn't seeing charm. She was doing math. I recognized it because I had seen that look before. Estate sale appraisers have it. Attorneys handling probate have it. It's the look of someone who has already separated a room into columns before they know what's in it. I noticed it and I set it aside. Because I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be the suspicious old man who just needed to give people a chance. They got engaged in December. Married the following September. It was a beautiful wedding at a vineyard outside of town. Daniel cried when he saw her come down the aisle. I cried too, because Miriam should have been there to see it. For the first few months, I told myself I had been wrong. Courtney seemed to make Daniel happy. She was organized and driven and social in the way that naturally shy people like my son need someone to be. She pushed him in the ways a partner should. Then in February, about 5 months into the marriage, things shifted. It started with questions. Casual ones at first. How long had I owned the building? What were property values doing on Lexington? Had I looked into any of those SBA retirement programs for small business owners? She asked the way people ask when they already know the answers and are testing to see what you'll volunteer. I answered carefully. I said the building had been good to us. I said I hadn't thought much about selling. I said Miriam and I had always planned to pass the business to Daniel one day, if he wanted it. Courtney smiled. Of course, she said. That's so sweet. The word sweet, when used to describe a 38-year plan, is not a compliment. By March, Daniel started seeming different on our Sunday mornings. Quieter. A little distracted. He'd look at his phone more than he used to. Once I asked him if everything was all right and he said yes. Just tired. The second time I asked, 2 weeks later, he said Courtney thought he was working too many hours and she wanted them to use his weekends more intentionally. More intentionally, I said. You know, he said, not meeting my eyes. Like planning things, activities, making the most of free time. I understood what he wasn't saying. She was pulling him closer to her and further from me, one Sunday at a time. The visits became less frequent. Then they became occasional. Then they stopped altogether and were replaced with texts, which are not the same thing, and both of us knew it. In April, my shop assistant, a woman named Gloria Simmons, who has worked the front counter for 11 years, pulled me aside on a Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Calloway, she said, which is how she addresses me when something is serious. Your daughter-in-law came in yesterday while you were at the parts supplier. I told her you weren't here. She said she just wanted to look around for nostalgia. Gloria paused. She went to the back room. How long was she back there? About 12 minutes. I walked to the back. Nothing appeared disturbed. But I know that shop the way you know your own hands. The invoice box was slightly off-center. The file drawer was half an inch further out than I leave it. Someone had been through the papers. I didn't say anything to Daniel. Not yet. I didn't have enough. What I did do, the following week, was call a private investigator. His name is Marcus Webb, former Buncombe County Sheriff's deputy, now working independently out of an office on Merriman Avenue. A customer had recommended him 2 years prior during a dispute over an estate piece, and I had kept his card in the back of my ledger. I called him on a Wednesday afternoon and asked him to meet me at the shop after closing. Marcus is methodical and unshowy, which is what you want in a man doing this kind of work. He sat across from my workbench, listened to everything I told him without interrupting, and asked exactly 4 questions when I finished. What was the address of the property? Did my son have independent access to my financial accounts? Had Courtney made any direct requests about the will? And did I have legal representation? I answered, the shop address, no, not yet directly. And yes, Robert Ashford, who had been my attorney for 19 years and had handled the estate planning after Miriam died. Good, Marcus said. He'd start surveillance the following Monday. That same week, I called Robert. I told him what I'd noticed. He updated my will that same month and restructured the trust so that the property and accounts would pass through conditions, not automatically. He also suggested I begin keeping written records of every unusual conversation. I told him I already was. I bought a small notebook, dark green, from the stationery store on Wall Street. I dated the first entry April 14th and wrote 3 sentences. I have kept a record every week since. What Marcus found over the next 2 months was not surprising, but it was specific enough to be useful. Courtney had met 3 times with a real estate attorney named Paige Hensley, who specialized in commercial property transactions. The meetings had taken place at a cafe downtown, not at a legal office, which suggested she was being careful about paper trails. Marcus also documented 2 phone calls captured through legal means from outside in which Courtney was overheard discussing the Lexington property and the estate timeline with a person whose voice he had not yet identified. In June, I saw the timeline comment myself. I had driven to Daniel and Courtney's house unannounced, something I hadn't done before, but I'd been invited for a cookout and arrived 40 minutes early. Daniel was in the backyard. I came around the side gate and heard Courtney inside on the phone. The kitchen window opened because it was warm. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard clearly. I don't know how much longer we're talking, Paige. He's 64, and he's on blood pressure medication, and he works alone in a basement every day. I'm not being morbid. I'm being realistic. At some point, this property becomes a decision. A pause. Yes. Daniel is aware we need to think about the future. He just needs more time to come around. I stood on the other side of that gate for about 30 seconds. Then I walked back to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and called Marcus. I gave him the name Paige Hensley. I told him what I'd heard. I told him I needed documentation. He found it within 2 weeks. Paige Hensley had already drafted a preliminary proposal for the sale of the Lexington Avenue building contingent upon a change in ownership. The proposal named Courtney Calloway as the transitional contact. My son's name was not on it. I want to pause here and tell you something I have not told anyone, except Marcus and Robert and Gloria. The night I read that proposal, I sat in the back of my shop for 3 hours with the lights off. Not because I was devastated, though I was, but because I was thinking about Miriam, about what she knew and when she knew it, about that bracket clock she carried in from the house and set above my bench without explanation. I got up and looked at it in the dark. Fruitwood case, brass dial. Miriam's careful restoration on the movement, which I had examined once years ago out of curiosity and closed back up. I had not opened the case since she died. That night I opened it. The movement was clean, as I expected. But the case itself, the bottom of the case, beneath the movement board, had a false floor. Miriam had created it herself, with a piece of fitted walnut veneer and 2 small brass clips that released when pressed together. Inside, folded into a square and sealed in a plastic sleeve, was a letter in Miriam's handwriting. I will not share every word of what she wrote. Some of it is between her and me, and nobody else. But the part that matters, the part that changed everything that followed, said this. She had seen the early signs of Courtney's ambition at the engagement dinner, before the wedding. She had done some quiet research of her own, spoken to a few people, asked some gentle questions, paid attention. She could not be certain, she wrote, but she was concerned, and she wanted me to be prepared. She had left documentation of her own findings in the bottom of the case. Account numbers. A name. A property transaction from 4 years earlier, in which Courtney had been involved and which had ended in a legal dispute over estate access. And then she wrote, Arthur, you fix broken things. That's the gift God gave you. But some things aren't broken yet, they're just going wrong. Watch for the signs. Protect what we built. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do. I sat with that letter for a long time. Miriam had been watching. She had been preparing. She had left me a tool inside a clock she restored with her own hands and set above my workbench 8 years before I needed it. She had trusted that I would find it when I was ready. I took everything out of that false floor and added it to the evidence I was building. Then I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside, and closed the clock. If you're still following along, leave a comment with the number 1. It lets me know you're still here. The months that followed were a study in patience I did not know I had. Marcus continued his work. Robert refined the legal protections. I watched Courtney the way I watch a clock with an intermittent fault, knowing the problem is there, waiting for the moment it surfaces clearly enough to address. What I noticed, over time, was how she was working on Daniel. She had not told him directly to distance himself from me. She was smarter than that. Instead, she had planted ideas. She mentioned once that I seemed a little controlling about the shop. She suggested another time that Daniel's close relationship with me made it hard for them to build their own identity as a couple. She brought up Miriam in ways that were meant to comfort, but actually kept Daniel low, soft comments about how hard it must be to feel like he couldn't measure up to his mother's memory, how maybe he idealized the past. None of this was said to me directly. I learned it from Daniel himself. In fragments, over months of careful conversation. He would say something slightly off a framing I didn't recognize, a hesitation where there hadn't been one before, and I would make note of it, page after page in the green notebook. Not to build a case against my son, but to document that someone else was slowly rewriting him. In September, 14 months into the marriage, Daniel called me on a Tuesday night. His voice was flat in a way that told me he'd been rehearsing. "Dad, I think we should talk about the shop." I told him to come in the next morning. He sat across from me at the workbench the same way he had since he was a teenager, watching me work, his elbows on the edge, hands folded. He looked tired. He'd lost weight. "Courtney thinks it might be time to start thinking about your retirement," he said. "She says you're not getting any younger. And the shop is a lot for one person. And with property values where they are on Lexington." "Daniel," I said, "stop. Don't say what she told you to say. Talk to me." He went quiet for a long time. Then his jaw tightened. "She says the shop is sitting on an asset we're not utilizing." "The shop is your mother's legacy." "I know that. Do you?" He looked up at me, and for just a moment, I saw my son behind whatever Courtney had been building over the past year. Uncertain, a little ashamed, reaching for something he couldn't name. "Dad, I don't want to lose the shop," he said quietly. She makes things sound so reasonable. And then I don't know what I actually think anymore." I leaned forward. "Then I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen without going home and talking about it tonight. Can you do that?" He nodded. "There are things happening around this shop that you don't know about. I'm not ready to tell you everything yet, because I need a little more time. But I need you to trust me, the way your mother trusted me. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long time. "Is Courtney involved?" "Give me 3 more weeks." He didn't like it, but he nodded. Those 3 weeks were where everything came together. Marcus obtained the documentation I needed. A recorded phone call between Courtney and Paige Hensley, in which the Lexington Avenue property was discussed as a sale-ready asset, contingent only on what Courtney described as the timing of transfer. In that same call, Courtney mentioned that my blood pressure medication had been a topic of conversation with her contact at the insurance office and that she was keeping an eye on things. She was tracking my health through my insurance. She had a contact inside the office, a woman she'd known from a previous real estate transaction who had given her access to information that was not hers to give. Robert and Marcus both said the same thing. "This was actionable," I said. "Not yet. One more thing." The last piece came from Gloria. On a Thursday afternoon, while I was at a client's home doing an on-site evaluation, Courtney came into the shop. She told Gloria she was picking something up for Daniel. Gloria said she'd need to wait in the front. Courtney agreed. then asked to use the restroom, which is in the back. Gloria showed her through. Courtney did not come back for 14 minutes. This time, I had installed a small camera above the workbench the week before. I watched the footage that evening. Courtney had gone directly to my filing cabinet. She had opened the second drawer, found the insurance file, and photographed 3 pages. Then she had stood at my workbench and looked at the bracket clock for almost 30 seconds. She picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. She did not find the false floor. That was the moment I called Robert and said, "It's time." I made the call to Daniel on a Friday morning. I told him I wanted a dinner. The 3 of us, at the Montford rooftop, a restaurant we'd been to twice as a family for important occasions. Private table. I told him I had something to share about the future of the shop. About everything. He called me back an hour later. Courtney had asked what the occasion was. He said I'd told him estate planning. She had told him she thought that was wonderful, and she would look forward to it. I told him the dinner was in 6 days. He said Courtney seemed excited. I told him to trust me. The morning of the dinner, I sat with Robert Ashford at his office on Charlotte Street. We reviewed everything we had prepared: the updated will, the trust conditions, the legal documentation of Courtney's meetings with Paige Hensley, the recorded call, Marcus's full written report. Robert had also coordinated with an attorney colleague who had agreed to be present at the restaurant, seated at the bar, available if the situation required legal witness. I asked Robert one question before I left. Was everything in order? He looked across the desk at me, the way people look when they want to say yes, but need it to mean something. Everything, he said, is exactly where it needs to be. I went back to the shop, opened the clock one last time, took out Miriam's letter, and read it slowly. Then I folded it into my inside jacket pocket. I was not going to share it publicly. It belonged to me. But I wanted her near me that night. At 7 o'clock, I walked into the Montford in my gray suit, with the bracket clock wrapped in canvas under my arm. Daniel was already at the table, quiet and straight-backed. Courtney was across from him, dressed beautifully, the picture of a woman who had come to hear good news. She smiled when I sat down. Warm. Practiced. "Arthur," she said, "this is such a wonderful idea. It's so important to get things organized." "It is," I said. "That's exactly why we're here." We ordered, made small talk. Daniel watched me the way people watch a doctor who has told them to wait for the results. Courtney ordered a glass of champagne. When the main course was cleared, I set the clock on the table between us. Courtney looked at it. "Is that Miriam's clock?" "It is," I said. "She restored it herself, the year before she died. She asked me to keep it at the shop. She told me I'd know when the time came to use it." Courtney laughed softly. "That's lovely. So sentimental. There's something inside it," I said. "My wife was a careful woman. She saw things other people missed, and she prepared for them. She left me a letter in a hidden compartment she built herself." The smile on Courtney's face changed slightly. "Not much. Just enough." I opened the case, released the false floor, and set Miriam's letter on the table. I did not read it aloud. That was not for the table. Instead, I set beside it a printed copy of Marcus's report, the meetings with Paige Hensley, the insurance records, the recorded call. "Courtney," I said, "this is a document you should read carefully. My attorney has a full copy. So does the insurance commission." Daniel looked at the papers. His face went still. I kept my voice level. "You have been meeting with a real estate attorney to arrange the sale of my property. You have been accessing my health insurance records without my consent. You told your attorney that you were watching for a transfer of timing. And 2 weeks ago, you came into my shop while I was away and photographed documents from my private files." Courtney set down her glass. "Arthur, I think you've misunderstood." "I have not misunderstood anything. These are out of context. I was only—" "Courtney." Daniel's voice was quiet. Final. She turned to him. "Don't," he said. The silence at that table was the loudest thing I have heard in 64 years. Robert's colleague at the bar caught my eye briefly. I gave him a small nod. He went back to his drink. Courtney's composure fractured piece by piece, the way old glasswork cracks slowly. Then all at once, she said things. Justifications, half-truths. A version of events where her intentions had been good and her execution had been misread. Daniel said almost nothing. He looked at the papers. He looked at me. He looked at his wife with the expression of a man reading a map for a place he thought he knew and finding all the roads have changed. When Courtney stood to leave, I said one more thing. The shop is not a transaction. It is your mother's work and mine, and it will pass to people who treat it that way. My attorney will be in contact with yours next week. She left. The door of the restaurant closed behind her. Daniel and I sat in the quiet for a while. How long? He finally said. 18 months. He looked at his hands. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed you to be able to look her in the eye without knowing. And because I needed time to be certain. You were protecting me. I was protecting your mother's work. And yes, you. He was quiet for a long time. Then, the clock. She left a letter inside the clock. 8 years ago. He pressed his hand flat against the table, steadying himself. She knew. She suspected. She wasn't certain. But she prepared. Daniel looked at the bracket clock sitting in the middle of the table, fruitwood case and brass dial and Roman numerals, still telling time the way it had been built to do. She was always 3 steps ahead of everything. He said softly. She was, I said. That's who she was. We sat there for an hour. We didn't talk much. Eventually we walked out together into the Asheville night. Downtown lit up in the easy way it gets in autumn, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment before we went to our respective cars. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. You don't have anything to be sorry for. Ilitha, you trusted your wife. That's not a failure. That's just love. He nodded. I gripped his shoulder. He put his hand over mine briefly, the way his mother used to. Then we said goodnight. I drove back to the shop, parked in the alley, took the bracket clock inside, and set it back on the shelf above the workbench where Miriam had placed it 8 years ago. I wound it because it had been sitting still since I'd lifted it from the shop, and I let it begin again. I stood in the back room listening to it tick. In the weeks that followed, the legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly and without drama. Courtney's contact at the insurance office was reported and subsequently terminated. Paige Hensley's firm sent a letter indicating they were withdrawing from any transaction related to the Lexington property. The documentation Marcus had gathered was thorough enough that no further escalation was required. Everyone simply stepped back and let the thing dissolve. Daniel filed for divorce in November. He told me Courtney had agreed not to contest it, which was the first honest exchange they'd had in longer than he could remember. He moved back into the small house he'd owned before the marriage, on a quiet street not far from the shop. He started coming back on Sunday mornings. The first Sunday, he showed up with coffee and a bag of pastries from a bakery on Haywood and stood at the front counter the way he used to stand when he was 15. I didn't say anything. I just unlocked the door and let him in. We didn't talk about Courtney. We talked about a cuckoo clock someone had brought in from a family estate that was going to take me the better part of a month to disassemble. We talked about the weather and a movie he'd seen. We talked the way fathers and sons talk when they're relearning the rhythm of each other after time away. 2 weeks later, I taught him how to clean a movement for the first time. He wasn't naturally gifted at it. He was too quick. The way engineers are always trying to solve when the job is to understand first. But he sat at the bench beside me for 2 hours without his phone, learning to be patient with something small and precise, and I watched him become a little more like himself with every careful turn of the screwdriver. At the end of the afternoon, he looked at the finished movement, clean and ready, and said, "Mom did this. She did. She was good at it. She was better than me. Don't tell anyone." He smiled for the first time in what felt like a very long time. I want to tell you something about what this whole experience taught me, because I didn't go through 18 months of documentation and preparation just to have a story. I went through it because the things Miriam and I built together were worth protecting, not for their dollar value, for what they mean, for what they represent, For the fact that somewhere in this building is 38 years of two people showing up and caring about the work. Greed doesn't announce itself. It arrives politely, asks reasonable questions, and makes you feel foolish for noticing. The people who love you for what you have rather than who you are will always find a way to make their interests sound like concern. They'll ask about your health. They'll talk about the future. They'll call your life's work a number and wait for you to start believing them. Don't let them. Watch for the signs. Keep your own records. Trust the people who show up without an agenda and love you without calculation. And if you have an attorney, keep them close, because the best time to build protection is before you need it. My name is Arthur Calloway. I'm 64 years old. I fix broken clocks and watches, and occasionally, when I'm very lucky, I help hold a family together. Miriam left me a clock with a secret inside and told me I'd know when the time came. She was right. She was always right. The bracket clock is still above my bench. It runs beautifully now. Miriam's restoration was, as always, flawless. I wind it every Sunday morning before Daniel arrives, and I listen to it tick, steady and certain, counting out every hour we still have together. Some mechanisms, once properly cared for, will run for a very long time. If this story meant something to you, leave a 2 in the comments so I know you stayed with me through the whole thing. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Some messages find the people who need them most.